light up. System, the online system, the booking, the website, all the reporting, the sales report, management report, all integrated into one.
Recognized by top analysts and advisors. In fact, one of our case studies, JCB, has been highlighted as one of the key case studies by IDC.
In a way that actually that totally commits you and yourself and your organisation.
The entire data management platform is powered by Wipro.
Good afternoon, everyone, and glad to see you all joining this event this afternoon of Simplex Connect 2020. Really pleased that everybody can join, and today we're going to be talking around making technology ready for defining workplaces. My name is Paul Davies. I'm the Non-Exec Director of Simplex Services, and I'll be your host and moderator for today's discussion. When we hosted our first Simplex event last year in London, no one would have imagined how life, business and technology would have changed as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic that has swept across the world. So today we are going to explore how and what those changes mean for everyone, and hopefully shed some light on options and opportunities to help you develop and sustain a successful business going forward. We're delighted to have three highly experienced panelists joining me today to discuss how technology can help organisations as they redefine their working and business models in response to this global pandemic. So, firstly, some housekeeping. Just so you know, we will be recording this session, and we are recording this session and making the content available to all attendees after the event. We encourage you to ask questions via the Q&A facility. You should have that at the bottom of your screen, and we will select at the end of the three questions that we've got for you. We'll select some questions to answer by the panelists. If we have more questions and we don't have the time to answer them all, don't worry, we will answer all questions and we will post the replies to them after the event. So, if everybody's ready, we'll now move on to the subject of today's event. I'd like to introduce our panelists, so for today, who have kindly agreed to join me on this panel discussion. So firstly, we've got Chris Hoard. Chris is a partner education lead at Vuzion. And Chris is a Microsoft valued professional. He's a Microsoft certified educator and a Microsoft certified trainer. And he works closely, very closely with Microsoft directly on their product development and implementation plans, enabling him to provide the latest information to Microsoft partners about how to get the best out of the Microsoft product suite. Welcome to you, Chris.
Thank you very much.
Secondly, we've got Lax Vaidya. Lax is the global head of transformation for Wipro. He's based in Reading in the UK. And Lax oversees all transformation projects across Wipro and has insight into how organisations are responding to the current situation with existing and planned transformation initiatives. And welcome to you as well, Lax. Thanks for joining us. And finally, Tom Brady. Tom is the CIO of the University of Law. Tom is responsible for delivering information and technology services to a successful and growing university based in campuses across the UK. As they prepare to start a new academic year, we will hear from Tom about his challenges and initiatives to ensure technology supports students, academic staff and professional support staff in these changing times. And good afternoon to you as well, Tom. Hi.
Thanks. Hi, everyone.
Excellent. So I'm going to, if we're all ready now, we will kick off. I'm going to ask a series of questions just generally about the topic today. And I'm then going to ask our panelists to sort of give their views, opinions, and experiences associated with this. So I'm going to, just so we know, I'm just going to start the first question I'm going to initially direct towards Chris. But the question is that we are discussing in general trends of how business will work going forward and how technology can support this. Do we think it's a strategic or a straight return to office, or will a form of hybrid working practice evolve? And if so, what do we need technology to do to support this? What are the pros? What are the cons? And what specific things are helping business with this change? So Chris, if I can ask you to kick off with your thoughts and views on this, that would be really good. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Paul, and thanks for everybody to take the time today to come to the event. I think, having thought about the question over the last couple of days, I think that with the impact of COVID-19, we are very much in uncharted territory. And I think that even now, I think it would be fair to say that a lot of businesses don't know what they're working through the problem, as it were, and they're trying to still come to terms with it. What it will happen within 3 months or 6 months or 9 months or even a few years from now. I think that for a lot of them, they themselves don't know. And because of this, I think there's going to be all different types of responses depending upon the business, depending upon the industry. Having had a talk to a lot of customers, having had a talk to a lot of partners, I think that you will have some businesses that now believe that it's going to be a case of hybrid going forward. They've seen COVID-19 and their businesses are working well in the current situation. And I think it's ratified what they've long believed was this hybrid approach. So some people working at the office, some people working remotely. I've also spoken to customers, on the other hand, that can't wait to get back in the office and get back to how things are supposed to be. So as soon as they can do, they're very proactive in getting their workers back into the office. And but these are quite sweeping generalizations. If we dig into that and we actually speak to people, different people will have different perspectives on this too. So I'm going to take myself as a case. I have long believed in hybrid working. I have long believed in this idea that work should be based around the preferences of the individual. So I was made to go into the office for many, many years doing a 9 to 5. I would have to travel back to my home, which is an hour away. So that's an extra 2 hours of travel. And I had to do that for over 10 years here in IT, when it made a lot of sense. My role and my responsibility could have just as easily have been done remotely as we have done in the past 6 months. And that, for me personally, is not only ratified what I believe in, but also as well as has had productivity gains as well. I have a lot more focus time. I can spend time or be more present at home for my 3-year-old son. But if you were to have the same conversation exactly with my direct line manager, Craig Gordon, who runs Vuzion All Up, Craig is somebody that very much needs to be around people and have personal connections with people. And he struggled mightily for the first few months of COVID, because he wasn't being around people. He needs that personal connection. He needs the rapport, and he believes that you cannot capture that within a remote environment. So I think that this is going to differ who you speak to person, from their own experience, but also their experience during the COVID-19 period. So I would say, from all of the conversations I've had over the last 6 months, I would say there is a general preference in the direction of hybrid. More people are saying our businesses can function now. COVID-19 has proved, and it's moving more from what the business wants to what users want. So they're saying, does this person actually work better in a remote environment than they did do in the office, because there are things like less distractions, they've got more time for focus work. So I think going forward, we will see gains in terms of hybrid. Some businesses will not go back all to being in the office. Some businesses will actually start making different strategic decisions to sell off, for example, their offices in order to be able to cut their costs and in order to become more profitable. And the technology is facilitating that. So as you said, I work very closely with Microsoft, and they have solutions such as Microsoft Teams and Windows Virtual Desktop that can facilitate people's roles remotely, and for them to be even more productive than they were previously in the office.
That's excellent. And just a question from me before we go on there, Chris, is that you talked about Microsoft's sort of solutions, and I know Microsoft obviously have had to invest sort of heavily in their development sort of process and timelines to sort of keep up, if you like, with the trends of this sort of enforced sort of remote working. I mean, any figures on, you know, sort of the amount of investment they've made and where they think they're going with this, and will it change now, do you think, going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I don't want this to just be a matter of opinion. I do want to bring in some statistics as regards Microsoft. So Microsoft polled a lot of the companies, these massive companies that worked directly with them, in terms of a preference of going back to the office or going with hybrid in the future. So for both line managers and their workers, it came out at roughly somewhere between 70 and 80% would prefer to move forward within a hybrid working environment. Now, in terms of, I just mentioned Microsoft Teams, for example. So Microsoft Teams now has over 75 million daily active users. That has shot up. Last year in July, that was 19 million. And right before COVID, that was somewhere around 22 million. So within 6 months, there has been this massive use of Microsoft Teams. But as you rightly said, even with the technology, to be able to facilitate remote working, Microsoft has still had to plow in quite significant development to its products to meet all of the scenarios when it comes to remote working. So some of the features that we've seen come out in Microsoft Teams has specifically surrounded meeting functionality. So to be able to see everyone within a meeting, to be able to stop people joining the meeting before the organizer. New presenter and attendee controls. We've got lots more coming out over the course of the next few months. The ability to what we call hard mute people within the meeting. And that has been driven both out of business and education scenarios. Microsoft have this great thing called user voice. So if you go online and into your browser and you were to put in Teams user voice, you can go and vote on the functionality that you want to see. So in part, it's been driven by Microsoft identifying those use cases and saying, we need to do better. We need to help people as far as we can be able to do their work in a remote scenario, but also longer term in that hybrid scenario. But it has also been pressure coming back from both organizations and educational institutions that have said, this is not meeting completely the way that we're working. You are going to have to develop more functionality for us to be able to work better.
Okay, that sounds very interesting, and I must say I'm sure a lot of us will be interested in the usefulness of a hard mute facility in meetings as well when we want to do that. But Tom, how do you sort of see that then from your end with regard to the use of these sorts of technologies? Have you found that the development has sort of picked up and is now sort of catching up with what your needs are?
Well, to be honest, Paul, working remotely is something that we've done at the university for a number of years, and we've done it quite successfully. Having said that, we haven't done it for 700 staff. So you can imagine we had quite a challenge on our hands to get everybody migrated and working remotely. Chris mentioned some of the technologies there. We're still a Skype for Business user, but we'll migrate to Teams very soon. It's on the roadmap. And we also use Citrix VDI, which has been a godsend to us, because if you can imagine trying to get 700 staff up and running quickly, there's a lot of work involved in that and a lot of investment. We were able to utilize our VDI environment and get everyone up and running within a couple of weeks, really, and working productively, I would say. The good thing about the VDI environment is we've got a secure environment, and we can allow people to use their own PCs, etc., and avoid the costs that we might have been faced with there. So that was something that we'd done a little while ago, and certainly turned out to be a great investment for us. But from the perspective of the staff also, as Chris mentions, that the work-life balance is definitely something that I think is motivating for them. I do see as much productivity. I wouldn't say there's more, but certainly as much productivity. We're churning out many projects remotely, which we'd never done before. But there's also some other pros as a university. You can imagine we have a lot of real estate, and we lease our campus, and there's potential moving forward that we don't need the same space, the same footprint to house. So that in itself we have some opportunities there to streamline the business. And another thing that's just come to my mind as we've been talking there is, with remote working, I have a little bit of a challenge. My IT department's based in Guildford, and obviously the London market is a challenge for us. The actual talent pool is national now. I'm now looking at bringing resources in, and I can bring them in from anywhere because I know they can work productively. We've got all the tools to support them, and that in itself is another advantage for us.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. And just so the attendees are aware, sorry, I know that at the moment you've got a nice picture of, well, you did have a nice picture of Chris, but it's just flipped over to Tom. So we're going to try and make sure that you see the person that's speaking at the time. So bear with us for that if you don't mind. But thanks for that, Tom. I mean, that's really interesting. I know you should say that last point is a very valid point in terms of resources. And then finally on this sort of question, and I know Lax, you've sort of joined us just today and hopefully just picked up on some of the discussion going on there. From your perspective, as a major sort of supplier and transformation sort of provider, how are you seeing the challenges of this from your perspective in terms of what Tom said and picked up what Chris was saying?
Sure. Thanks, Tim. I think it was well put by Tom when he said that they could really spin up services and have 700 plus users get to business very quickly and projects delivered in a much faster pace than they thought. I think as an IT services organization, I think I just completely reflected what he said, that today we are able to survive. Our businesses, our globally distributed workforce is able to actually deliver capability and services to our clients just because COVID, in a sense, had made remote work just a new normal, a way of acceptance to say, hey guys, if I want to start a project, I don't need to wait for someone to be brought in from US or Asia. He can do it from wherever he is, and I can quickly start the project and get the outcomes done. But having said, if you look at our internal teams, there had been a bit of an emotional side to all this new ways of working that has created. There is a bit of positive and a bit of a negative side, right? The positive side, definitely. I think the meetings have become much more productive. I would say the average time of our meetings have come down from a typical 90 minutes to now it's only 40 to 30 minutes, because you don't have the side talk anymore. You are on a screen and you just need to make sure that you're talking to the point. So the meetings have become much more productive. The value that customer companies are getting, because people can work an extra 2 hours just like that, because they are available at home, and the breakfast is served in the table, the lunch is served in the table. In many cases, dinner is also served in your table. So you don't need to go out for a coffee break and have a break at all. That's the expectation, I would say, from the productivity per se. On the employee side, I think it's just taking a bit of a toll. I would say not everywhere, some cases where they feel that maybe they're just glued on to the workspace more than what they were. They're finding difficult to just find a break or a time to chill out and get back to business. So I think it's got positives and negatives, but I think that's a new norm, and I'm sure we will find a more amicable way to make sure the best out of this.
Yeah, and I certainly agree with you there, and I'm sure others would on the panel and attendees would be familiar with this, and it is something that we really must, as leaders in organisations, need to really be aware of in terms of that balance with the ease of being mobile and not sort of having, if you like, the travel or people not being effectively at work while they're travelling or at home, to this point that they are always there. So that's a very valid point that we should remember. And then going on from that, I was going to ask the question around as this situation evolves, for you, Lax especially, what challenges are there for suppliers to provide the levels of service and technology that customers are now demanding, and how you see in that sort of either return either to where it was pre-lockdown sort of levels, or is it a completely different sort of perspective, and generally what you think, what your opinions are about what and how this will develop going forward.
Sure. And Paul, take my response as a response from a supplier, right? Because I'm sure there are different dimensions of how the challenges and the problems should be perceived. So from a supplier, I think what we have seen in the last 6 to 8 months is, one, each of our customer and businesses are doing a strict review of their spend profile, right? And I think IT has been the quote unquote easy candidate to be picked and said, why don't you reduce your cost by 30 to 40%, because obviously we are where we are and there are much more business impacting areas that I need to divert the funds to. So there's a big strain towards how the budgets are going to be allocated and spent. And the moment there is a pressure on budget, the first constraint is on projects. So we are seeing as a supplier organization, there is a bit of a dampness to the projects that you used to get from our customers. Customers have possibly withheld or delayed some of the discretionary projects that they used to do. And maybe they're only doing very core compliance centric or keeping afloat projects to make sure that their business is alive. So one, we are seeing a bit of a deferment in projects, and also in some cases they're just saying we may not do the projects. And in some programs where we have provided a lot of contractors and support staff, the easier answer for many customer organization is to say, hey guys, if I have to really look at optimizing my spend, first let me cut the contractor ecosystem, right, or my supplier ecosystem. Because obviously the intent is to protect the base, to protect the employee base as much as possible. So that's come to a bit of a threat in terms of looking at the contractors. There's a bit of an retrenchment of many of our contractor programs that we have got, as well as some of the projects work that we did has to be deferred or cut to size to meet the current constraints and challenges. Now, the challenge from the customer is two-way. One, they have seen a pattern of how these things can work in the last 6 to 8 months. And some of you are sensing that this is how it's going to be for the future as well, because they know that things can get delivered in a much more distributed way, much more cost optimal way. So this could become the new normal, where the budgets are going to be what they are, but they still need new projects, they still need capability at those same budget, at the same constraints. Now, as suppliers, if we have to be able to keep ourselves updated in this market, the only way for us to do it is, one, relook at how we are addressing the customers. One, I can't keep keeping the same level of siloed skill sets. So we are starting investing on what we call as a PI skill set, which is basically 2 primary skill and 1 secondary skill, which is a process skill, right? So that people are able to deliver more capability, and with leverage of automation, other skills, things available in the marketplace, they're able to deliver better value for possibly the same pie of share of wallet that's being assigned to us. So one, we are saying we will relook at our skill set, make sure that they are able to deliver more than one skills, more than one area of expertise, maybe on the technology side and maybe one on the process side, and thereby we are able to cover a larger gamut of the scope of work with the same resource or skill set. The second leverage point is the automation and the usage of automation at work. Earlier, many of the customers were willing to adopt automation as long as it's very simple and password and things like that. They were not very keen to leverage the second level of mature automation, naturally because of complexity and tools and whatnot and stuff like that. But with the challenges of cost and still wanting to deliver the same level of value, people are saying, hey guys, if automation can deliver the same outcomes at a much more predictable way and at a much more cost optimal way, why don't we test that, right? And hence, we are also relooking at our portfolio of services to see automation to play a very important role, not only in front-end services, but also a lot of back-end project management, as well as consulting and audit services as well. So through a combination of differentiated skill set, a skill set which is much more diverse, which is a skill set which is much more talented on multiple technologies, and leveraging automation is where we thought collectively we can address the cost challenges of the customer, because the project is there to stay, right? You can't, it's not gone anywhere, right? You still need to keep the server up, you still need to keep the systems up, you need to do a project, you need to upkeep your applications, you need to deliver business value to your end customers, but at a much reduced share of wallet. And that's where we are leveraging these 2 levers to help value to us. And again, cloud had played a very important role as well, all in these dimensions.
Okay, that's really good, Lax. And I'd be interested just on that point, perhaps to just put that over to Tom as well, from a customer perspective. You know, what's your views on what Lax has sort of said there? Would you relate to that in terms of, you know, what he said and what you're looking for?
Yes, certainly. I mean, what I would say from a perspective in the education market, the University of Law, we are just about to grow by up to 25% in student volume this year. So the number of projects that we're going to be working on is actually spiraling. Obviously, we have to keep a close control on the cost, but we're really pushing ahead to move to a fully digital and online platform, which in itself brings challenges. And that's where we really rely on the suppliers that we're going to engage with. I always try and encourage my suppliers to feel as though they're part of my IT department, so they understand the challenges that we have. I'll be saying to my providers, come along and meet my team, but don't just meet my team, meet people in the business, understand their challenges also, feel their pain, so you can actually focus your efforts on solving the business challenge rather than my IT specs. And the second point Lax makes is something which I probably will mention also later on. Automation is very, very key, and is a big focus for us at the moment. We are looking at some different areas on automation, which I'll mention later.
Excellent. Okay, well, we'll look forward to that. And I'm also impressed, and I like your attitude towards the way that you're working with suppliers, and that's something else that maybe on another day we can have a better discussion on. And just before I move on there, Chris, have you got anything else you would like to add to that particular discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the points that have been made so far have been spot on, and they've been very pertinent. And I think that when we were running through them, I could really resonate to those points. As being part of a tier 2 CSP distributor, as it were, as an IT supplier, I think that when I attended Microsoft Inspire and they were talking about COVID-19 there, they came up with 3 principles. The first they came up with is the concept of recovery. It's our duty as suppliers to help be the first responders, the digital responders onto the scene with our customers and our partners, and work with them and collaborate with them and help them deal with the initial impact of COVID-19. We've been helping partners and their customers help with the impact in terms of their technology. They've had lots of customers with on-premise solutions that no longer work for them in this current model. And so there's been a lot of migrations, or for those on-premise, there's been a lot of consolidation of systems, the application of automation. If we think about Microsoft, they've had Microsoft 365, which is their productivity cloud suite. Microsoft 365 was released in 2017, but in fact it was 2016, but Office 365 has nearly been around for 10 years, and BPOS even before that. So Microsoft, even before COVID, for a number of years has been very well prepared as businesses were starting to move to work remotely and get all of their IT systems. So it's very important, point one, for us to respond and be the first responders. The second is that we've got a continuing duty to help businesses recover from the current situation. And again, that is working with them in close conjunction, trying to see what we can automate, trying to see what we can move to the cloud so that things are cheaper for them, that they get a greater return on investment in their services, but it also helps to make them more productive. And third, we have an ongoing duty in the future to help them re-envision how their business can be. We have real conversations to have with partners and customers to say, how are you working right now? How is it going for you? If it's successful, maybe you want to think about more of this going forward. The point has been made about the real estate. Do we need that real estate anymore? What is the satisfaction of your workers really now compared to what it was previously in the future? And I think that, just to add a final point, is there not very many people want to say it openly at this current time, but it has been an opportunity with COVID to both improve, to reevaluate what businesses are doing from a technology perspective. And the ones that are doing well today are the ones that have been doing this for some time, even before COVID. They've seen this coming down the line. COVID-19 has been a trigger, but it's not been the start of the process for many businesses. They were beginning to do this anyway.
Excellent. Yeah, no, and I agree with that as well, Chris. And I mean, it's interesting that, you know, we mustn't get too focused. As you say, the technology has been there. The technology, you know, we've been using it. It is developing, but you're right. It's, you know, organizations that are now sort of learning how to adapt and change, you know, and probably culturally they're changing their you know, their sort of inner DNA to the way they work on a day-to-day basis because they are doing things so differently. So that's really, really helpful. Just to let everyone know, thanks very much indeed. We are getting some questions, which is excellent. And as I say, we will answer those after this next question. Because I'd just like to sort of wrap up on the subject area here that sort of runs quite nicely into the next stage. And then we will answer some of these questions. What I wanted to do is the next question really I was going to sort of put to Tom initially, but the question is, how and what do organisations and businesses see as their biggest hurdles and challenges to overcome? And how do the panel see these challenges being addressed? So Tom, sorry Chris, you're there, but Tom, what is the University of Law doing about this at this time?
Yeah, as I was saying before, Paul, we're now having to move to a much more digital platform, an online platform, because a lot of our students don't really want to travel to be on campus. it's great that we can do that, and we did switch quickly. But one of the things it feels to us at the moment is that we're known as a provider, high-level provider of law, and we've got a real strong brand to go with that. But all of a sudden, going online brings a lot more competition to us, and it sort of weakens our brand in a way. One of the things we say is our USP would be we have ex-lawyers who are our tutors. And if having a lesson face to face with a lawyer, it's not going to be happening as much now. So how can we differentiate and stay ahead of the competition? What can we do with our online platforms to make them more seamless, more attractive, and more rewarding to the student, rather than the new people who are coming to the market who don't have the history or the brand, but they're still trying to fight us on cost. So there's a lot of competition coming along to the market now that we're having to fight as well. Bringing that, we also have very demanding students now. Everybody wants value for money. There's no such thing as a standard day. I think Chris mentioned that earlier. Systems have to be available, and we all know that people want to connect anytime, anywhere, from any device. But that's becoming more and more just an expectation. That in itself has a knock-on effect for the IT department. We have to do housekeeping, we have to do upgrades, we have to do fixes, and trying to manage that time while also giving a platform to both the students and the staff who are working extra hours, that becomes another challenge for us also. Moving on, we're having to try and give as much information to the student. I mean, this is not new in terms of portals, one-stop apps. We've got to get everything in one place. They don't want to go looking around and searching for their information. So in the background now, we're working on several different projects to try and deliver that information, make sure the communications to them is timely and accurate. Remote staff working is obviously, it's a standard now, but that brings concerns around security. We know there's a lot of hacking going on, and it's risen during COVID. We've seen some examples in the press as well. So my security team in the background, working on a daily basis to ensure that there's no loopholes or vulnerabilities in our platforms. That's another one. And another thing I've just mentioned before, there's a positive for the job market. It can also turn the other way, because all of a sudden you're looking at your key staff, and there's more opportunities for them as well. So you've got to make sure you keep on top of your staff retention and keep them motivated. Remote discussions is not the same as a face-to-face chat and an arm around the shoulder like we used to do. So that's something that you can't just put to one side and expect that everyone's happy. So you've got to keep an eye on that also. So there's a number of challenges. I don't know the answer to them all, but we're working through as best we can.
That sounds very, very interesting. And I think also you mentioned you were looking at automation generally as well. Is that something that you see as a sort of
absolutely
an option to improve?
Cost control is always high on my agenda, and it's never going to go away. But when you've got cost challenges, but also a company that's going to grow by up to 25%, you've got to look at new innovations. And we're looking at the RPA side of things, robotic process automation. We're just about to run a pilot now in our assessments department. It's been very interesting. It's technology that I've only just come across in the last few months. But basically, we're going to introduce digital workers into the workforce. The good thing about a digital worker is it'll work 24 hours a day. It won't be sick. It won't ask for holidays. It's not temperamental. And we can see a lot of output for that. And with the way we're trying to sell it within the business also, it's not about replacing people. It's about doing the mundane, manual, repetitive tasks. And actually, it's an assistant to our key people. The robot will do the tasks, and the intelligence that's needed from a human will be the focus of our staff as we move forward. So that's an exciting time. But as you can imagine, it's also a difficult one to sell. People normally look on the negative side of something like that. So once we've completed our pilot, we're looking to try and market that and show the benefits of what we've been able to achieve.
Excellent. No, that's really interesting. That sounds very exciting as well. I must say, I'm That's, as I say, something to be interested in. Lax, I was going to ask you something there that Tom raised a very valid point around some of the projects he's doing and the challenges that included things like security and the increased, sort of concerns about security when you are, maybe perceived, it may be real that you're less control over the sort of the end user's sort of end user point and how data's flying around the organization. How are you seeing, is that something that you are working on as well?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, Tom gave a good lead of saying it's always on IT, right? So the natural expectation is it's supposed to be available anytime and 24/7 and running at the same performance and capability. The moment you're going to have users who are going to consume Office, naturally you are exposing them to a public network, and as rightly said, the number of ransomware attacks in the last 6 months have been the highest over the past. Right? Hence, we created what we call as a zero trust security framework. Right? And then the word is actually says trust no one, trust nothing. Right? In the sense that try to constrain as much as possible the access to your device, to the end device, which is actually the entry point for all such malicious things, and deliver the capability. The challenge is the moment you're going to put so much of constraints on a laptop and give it to a user to consume at home, he's going to say, hey guys, this is as good as my home device, and it just allows me nothing but possibly browse my enterprise application on a VPN or on a secure network, and I'm not even able to do anything else. So it creates a bit of an emotional strain to our employees. So we are focusing on how we will write a set of policies which will make sure that if users are going to consume or deliver IT from home or from outside the premise of office, they are covered, one, from an insurance standpoint, because obviously the physical and the liability insurance are extremely important from that standpoint. Two, how do you still give them a comfort of being able to access other resources, but not compromise the company assets or company applications? Like VDI, the virtual desktop infrastructure, is a good technology that we are leveraging to give BYOD capability to the user. But whenever he's using a business application or enterprise application, log on to a VDI, which is a much more secure way of accessing a business application. So in a sense, the employee feels that he has got a device which is quote unquote freedom device of his choice, and he's having a bit of a freedom to use for other social activities as well. But when it comes to business, his access is controlled, restricted, and well managed from a security standpoint. I think creating that right balance of choice of device, choice of freedom, and still getting the work done in such hybrid model is possibly the biggest hurdle that we are going to face. And then I think we are all finding jointly answers to address that.
That's brilliant, yeah, and that's a really valid and interesting point about the insurance sort of aspects of that. I know there's lots of things we should be looking at, but a lot of organisations, if you're sort of listening on this discussion and outside, being aware of that is probably a really good piece of advice. Thank you, Chris. Before I sort of ask you to sort of any additional points, I feel compelled. We have a question that I think links quite nicely into what we've been talking about there. So I'm just going to introduce that, if you don't mind, and then perhaps the panelists as a whole, after your thoughts, Chris, we can sort of expand it out. But Carmel has asked a question which I think is very valid in terms of, well, where people are now working a lot more from home, the internet connections are now sort of the really important things to, in your daily business life. So how will our home sort of internet connections cope with all this home working is the question. And what happens also to the fact that organizations have invested a lot of money in business connections, business internet connections into offices, which are now lying empty and, sort of getting hardly any use at all. So that I think is a valid point to what we were talking about around that. So with that in mind, Chris, could I just ask you to sort of follow up what Tom and Lax have been talking about, and maybe then if the other two have any other comments on the internet question, we can take those further.
Yeah, I think that they are, it kind of extends on from the question really that's just being asked. I'll try to cover both of them and intersect. I think security is a really, really important point now. In if you were to look within the Microsoft 365 package, it's been specifically designed for security as well as productivity. Before it was called Microsoft 365, it was called Secure Productive Enterprise. So that's a bit telling in what it's designed to do. So for many years, we've had our Office 365 applications, we've had Exchange, and we've had SharePoint, and we've had Microsoft Teams, and we've had Yammer. Those are all our productivity apps, which are helping us in order to be able to do more work. The security part comes in with things like what I would call the enterprise mobility and security. So that is products such as Intune, which is designed to be able to control and regulate mobile devices. It's things like cloud app security that can monitor what applications that you're allowed or not allowed to run on the machine. It's about things like Microsoft Defender ATP, which will be endpoint protection on your corporate machine. And within inside Microsoft 365, depending upon the SKU that you are looking at, it has all of this, because Microsoft has been working with very large enterprises for the majority of its life, and it has all of those requirements in mind. But also as well, it spends more than 1 billion every single year on security. So again, it had a lot of these security features even before COVID came in place. But what I think that what they're now doing is they're infusing it based upon AI through a lot of their security in order to be able to protect people within remote environments needing less security. And it's important, I think, for every organization going forward to have an understanding of 3 principles, which is, first of all, zero trust. So that's never trust, always verify is the kind of slogan. It can't just be for the application. And having, for example, multi-factor authentication, you need to verify the app, verify the devices that they run on, and verify the individuals from an identity perspective. The second point is principle of least privilege, which is one we can all learn from. Principle of least privilege means that only people have access to what they need to access. And the third is what we call defense in depth. As organizations, we don't just have to think about, let's say, the application. We have to think of the data within inside that application. We need to think of the network layer and the perimeter layer and the physical infrastructure. And moving to something like Microsoft 365 or Azure, we know that that physical security is covered because it's run within Microsoft's data centers. So an understanding of organizations for security is absolutely paramount, because as was said, there has been an increased attacks against individuals and remote workers, because for a lot of organizations, particularly small businesses, they haven't got networks necessarily that IT admins can protect. And that's why a solution like Microsoft 365, more and more organizations, particularly educational organizations, are taking it up, because it's built to protect devices, it's built to protect in decentralized environments. So you have something like Microsoft 365, or secondly, you would deploy something like Windows Virtual Desktop that is actually a secured environment built in, and administrators can have very strict controls over it. Now, the experience of that for the users themselves, I think, can benefit from education on security, but it brings it back to this point of what the users need to be successful with inside their remote and home environments. This could cover the internet, this could cover their local machines. All of the applications from Microsoft have minimum requirements for them to be able to run. It could be that they need additional devices. So, for example, headsets or mics or cameras or better lighting to hold better meetings. And I completely get the point that certain businesses might have already invested in the hardware or the infrastructure for their office environments rather than their user environments. But these are things that they are going to have to need to consider going forward. And I think it all works back to that decision about how they want to run their business, whether they want to move everything back in the office, or it's going to trigger a transition to be, well, we might reconsider what we were going to do with the office, or starting to sell off the office space and invest more into the devices for users who work remotely, or it could be a bit of both. So in our own case, we have 2 floors in a building. We have in the office that we have in our HQ. The business is considering selling off the whole top floor of the office, which will save it a considerable amount of cost every month. That then cost can then be repurposed for better devices for the workforce. So literally stopping one and saving somewhere is being redistributed to somewhere else. In terms of the specific point about internet connectivity, I think it's fair to say that we are quite blessed here in the UK in terms that most people have fairly good internet at this current time. So I think that the packages these days are more competitive than most people have quite good broadband for their own personal consumption, which is easy enough to be able to run a Teams or a Zoom meeting or do the tasks that they need to do.
Okay, that's fantastic, Chris. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I think there's definitely stuff there to be done, and I think organisations need to be very aware of that from individuals' personal sort of situations and how they connect. I'm conscious of time, and as we move on these things, anything else do you want to add from the other two, from Lax or Tom, on that latter discussion?
No, I think Chris has covered well. That's right.
Yeah, I would say that we still have a number of users who will complain about broadband speed, and we'll never get away from that. It's a frustrating bit for the IT department because we just cannot be at that last mile of the network, and it's a little bit out of our control. We do our best, but I think using the VDI solution is a help to that because it's a lot less traffic across the network. So primarily we can support OK. I think you're always going to have a few people who just do not have that. I live in the country, I know what it's like. So there are other options with 4G and 5G coming along, which might help to support that as well.
Yeah, and I think that's very true actually, and that's something that will develop, I'm sure. And you're absolutely right. It's we'd like to think that I mean, a lot of us are well off and we're well provisioned, but again, I think it's just being aware of that when we're putting we're asking employees to do the work they're doing remotely from home, from wherever, that we can accommodate that.
And one very quick point to finish off. The technology is backing that off too. So take Microsoft Teams. They've developed the technology to hand off basically from broadband to 4G as you're using the service, but they're also using what they've moved from the Silk to the Satin codec, which is far less in terms of bandwidth use. Mm-hmm. So they are pushing the technology to make sure that you can work on congested lines.
That's absolutely essential, as you say, and the more that's communicated to users, the better, I think. As I say, I'm conscious of our time. We've had a really good discussion. I've got a couple of other questions here that I'll just ask for sort of, if you like, just very quick responses because I'm conscious where we go. Given the current COVID situation, how relevant is the employee experience with most employees working from home? So we've touched on this a little bit, but basically, your very quick sort of views on how you feel employee experiences when they're not in the office engaging with other employees all the time. How's that sort of a challenge? Maybe
I sort of have a mixture of staff, and for some people it works really well. But I've also got staff who live alone, and they find it rather frustrating not to be able to get into the office and what have you. So there's a mixture there. A lot of people are finding that the work-life balance is great, and they're finding that they are productive working from home, and we don't have to motivate them. But once again, we have to keep an eye on certain staff who who just feel a little bit out of touch with the rest of their department. So what we're trying to do is have general sort of lunch get-togethers for the staff, just so everybody's getting together and having a little bit talk, but not necessarily about work, just to keep the momentum going and the collaboration between the team. But I would say in general it's working fine, but you have to be mindful that it doesn't fit for everyone.
Okay, yeah, no, I appreciate that. That's very true. And Lax, anything else that sort of comes to mind for you? Don't know if we've got Lax, might have dropped off there. Never mind, never mind. So I think that's been useful, and as I say, I think again a very valid point in terms of, you know, working with your employee base. You know, people still need to see each other and want to sort of you know, engage and interact, and we all work in different ways, as you say. Where some of us are very fortunate in terms of the space we might have in our, you know, home environment to work freely. Some are, as you say, sort of sharing houses and whatever, and it's something that we do need to be very conscious of, and hopefully the technology, as you say, is improving that. Glad to hear some of that's happening with regard to the, you know, technology that Microsoft are deploying now, so that's really good. As I say, I want to sort of wrap up. There was a couple of questions in the queue, which is great, and I do appreciate those. I'll take one last one, and then, as I say, if I can, I'd like to just sort of wrap up before 3. As I say, a couple of our panelists have got to shoot off, so we don't want to sort of hold them and make them late. So Naga has sort of asked a question about what about work from offshore teams as they work from home, and does their productivity remain the same as before due to the broadband connectivity, time difference and everything else? Is there a difference? I think, you know, Lax, you mentioned this with, sorry, but Lax mentioned this around, you know, the fact that the resources, and Tom is the same actually, that, you know, you're sort of got a wider pool, if you like, in terms of a reach of where your resources can be located. I think if anything, that possibly assists with that, and, you know, the flexibility taken in moderation and understanding about, you know, the length of a working day, but you can probably work quite effectively. Chris, what's your view?
No, absolutely. As an MVP, I work with people all over the world on projects. I have an event coming up on the 7th, of which there are 90 different speakers at this event representing 23 different countries. And I agree exactly what you're saying. I think that you have the wider pool to work with people. Internet will always be a problem, and connectivity wherever you go. I think that's been kind of established, but there are ways of working around that, both in terms of the technology and in terms of the working habits and the applications that you have. We've kind of moved, I think, past the point of distinguishing between, I guess, people working in a singular location and offshore, because humans ultimately are all very similar, and they all have you know, very similar behaviours.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's absolutely right. So as we sort of approach the hour, I'm going to wrap up, if you don't mind. As I say, I've got a couple of questions that we will answer and get back to you on. So thank you very much indeed. I hope that you found the discussion useful, and I hope that the discussion has prompted some thought for everybody on the call or on the actual attendees to sort of think about how, you know, maybe we can, you know, you can do things in a different way. Finally, I'd just like to thank everyone on the panel. Thank you to Chris. Thank you to Lax and to Tom for your contribution, and to everyone who has attended today. I hope the session has provided some thought, some reassurance if you're wondering whether you're doing the right thing, and ideas that you can take away and use in the workplace to enable your organisation to work effectively at this time. So thank you once again. Really good. I've enjoyed hosting and moderating this with the panel. As I say, best regards to everyone, and importantly, all stay safe. Thank you.